Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, television, books, and in popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to another program. My name is Bruce Markison, and as always, I'm joined by co-host and producer, executive producer, Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how are you this week?
Doing great, Bruce. It's been a very busy week, but I'm happy to be here this evening with everyone. How's everything going with you?
Good. It's summer has arrived officially, and here in Cooperstown as well. We actually have sunny skies, which is why those who are watching me on video see that half of my face is in the sun. That's the perils of working in something that's not an actual studio, but is actually a dining room, but we work through it. And Tracy, on this week's program, very glad to have a friend of mine and someone that I think you'll enjoy talking to as well. It's an opportunity to talk to with an actor named Dwier Brown. Dwier is best known for playing John Kinsella in the wonderful baseball-themed classic Field of Dreams. Dwier has also appeared in several horror films and television shows, including two of the House films from the 1980s, a 1990 film that I just saw, The Guardian, which I think is really good and doesn't get credit for being good. Also has appeared in 2002's Red Dragon and in episodes of TV shows like The Twilight Zone and Ghost Whisperer. Dwier has had a varied career in Hollywood, and he's a writer too, author of a terrific book that has sold really well. It's called If You Build It, a book about fathers, fans, and Field of Dreams. Dwier, welcome to the Ghostly Gallery. It's good to see you after a few years. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Bruce. Thank you. Hi, Tracy.
So, Dwier, right off the bat, let's talk about your background. You were born in town of Pittsburgh, great city that I've been to several times. It's also a city with a great history of independent filmmaking. And I know that you eventually did move with your family to another location after that. I'm curious, though, going back to your younger years, how exactly did you become interested in acting? Where did this start for you?
Well, let's see. After I was born in Pittsburgh and lived there for a few years, by the time I was 8 years old, my father decided to move us to a farm in Ohio. And one of the things that we could get out of farm work for was either sports or being in plays. So my brother and sister and I all took every opportunity we could to be in plays just to get out of work, I think mostly. But, it was also a lot of fun. We most of the stuff was in our church, because the town that we moved to was Sharon Center, Ohio, population 300. So there weren't a lot of big time opportunities. Wow. My older brother started a little local theater group. We did one act plays in the summer, and I was in my senior musical in high school. And it was just sort of something we did for fun. And then I went to college and decided to get into radio and television, thinking that it was like being on stage, but you could actually make money at it. And I think I was wrong, counts, to be honest. But in any case, I ended up getting cast in plays still in college and really loved it. And when I got out, everybody in Ohio said, "Hey, what, you can't be an actor. You've got to do something to make a living. What are you going to do?" And I didn't know any better, so I just assumed that was true. And but when I got out of college, the economy was in a pretty bad state. So my idea of getting a job as a copywriter doing advertising and then getting to New York was kind of went bust. So I thought, well, I don't have anybody depending on me. I'll go to Chicago. And so I went there and kind of got involved in improv at Second City. And anyway, I just kept getting cast in things and got an opportunity to come to LA and got put in the Thornbirds, one of the first things. And anyway, then I just kept getting bit by the bug and enjoyed it. And so I guess I proved the odds wrong and had a 45-year career in show business. So long answer to a short question.
Yeah. No, it's a good answer. Yeah, fascinating. I didn't know your town was that small. 300. Of course, where I am, Cooperstown, we're not exactly a metropolitan region either. We have 1,800, but 300 people growing up in the Midwest. If that doesn't prove that anybody can have success no matter where they come from, I don't know what does prove it.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, the town was 300, but I lived 15 minutes away from the town. So yeah, we were, yeah, we were out there.
Everybody loves talking about Field of Dreams. I've talked to you about that in the past, and it's a big part of your career. It really came 7 years into your career as a professional actor. It came relatively early. Tell us how this role came about for you.
Well, you know, it's just came down the pike to my agent like any other audition. The production companies, for those people who don't know how movies work, you have a movie, all the cast list there. You send that out to all the agents. Well, this is how it used to work. It's more more technical now, but you send it out to all the agents, and they would submit whatever actors they represented that they thought were right for these roles. The casting people would go through and choose amongst those who they wanted to actually have for an audition. And if the audition goes well, you get a call back. And so it was really just one of those. The only difference with Field of Dreams is that I had read the book Shoeless Joe that it's based on when I was in college and just loved it. So it was always exciting to be given material that you're familiar with or that you really like. And so, but it was just an audition like any other. And yeah, I feel, you know, very lucky to have, I guess, looked enough like Kevin Costner to have played his father and you know, done well enough at the audition that I got cast. So
That's interesting. You really feel that if you read the book going into a movie adaptation, it can make your work as an actor better.
yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, there's a backstory written into novels or novellas. You know, they have to tell more of the story with words. And you know, you get a movie script and it says, you know, so and so 25, he's an architect, or you know, a little paragraph of explanation rather than sometimes a whole novel, because you know, not only is it the description, but everything they do throughout the story. And in fact, one of the things that was very interesting about Field of Dreams was that in the book Shoeless Joe, John Kinsella appears in chapter 1, and he kind of has a continuing conversation with Ray throughout the whole novella. And one of the brilliant things that Phil Robinson, who directed and adapted the script for the screen, he put John's appearance at the end of the movie, of course, which is what made it so kind of profound. And when the entire cast, Kevin and James Earl and Burt Lancaster and Tim Busfield, have all opened the audience's heart, there I appear on screen, and I just take my catcher's mask off and walk right in. And it made that appearance so much more significant because they waited until the end, when you thought the story was essentially over. Everybody's gotten what they wanted. You know, Ray saved the farm. James Earl's going to write again. You know, Tim Busfield has seen the ball players. Moonlight Graham has gotten to play ball again, you know. And then the surprise of the father appearing, it was brilliant. And it certainly made the difference for me. If my character appeared in Act 1 of the screenplay, I just don't think it would have carried the significance that it has over the years.
Yeah, that's a great point. Field of Dreams obviously is not a horror film, but you do essentially portray a ghost, the ghost of John Kinsella, and he is father to the lead character of Ray Kinsella, played by Kevin Costner. Was it strange for you playing the father to another character when in fact you're 4 years younger than the actor playing him? Was that weird?
Yeah, I mean, it's no weirder than anything else you do in the theater. And in one play I did, I played 3 different characters. One was Australian, one was English, one was the grandfather of the other one. You know, your level of willing suspension of disbelief and imagination make that pretty easy to do. You know, Yeah, it was. I mean, it was, certainly a privilege, but that part of it. I mean, what was stranger about it that a lot of people don't know is that my own father died 30 days before I went to go shoot that movie, and
Yeah.
I'd already been cast in the film, and I was going to Iowa, and I decided to stop at my parents' farm in Ohio, sort of on the way, as I frequently did whenever I was shooting on location. And the day I arrived, my father died unexpectedly that night, and just threw everything into very strange, more intense situation. 30 days later, I go to Iowa to play a dead father coming out of the corn to have a catch with their son. It certainly made it a more profound experience for me, emotionally. And so I think that part of it was probably more arresting than the idea that Kevin, who was older than me, was playing my son.
Yeah. Dwyer, how old was your father?
He was 67 when he died. Yeah. It
So
was
you said
interesting. I'm sorry.
it was unexpected. You said,
Yeah, he hadn't been sick or anything. And yeah, I mean, all his systems just sort of shut down, and it's still a mystery. We had an autopsy done because it was so surprising, and it really concluded nothing. But yeah, my father had, other than working on the farm, he was an architect for Firestone Rubber Company, kind of remodeling their stores. And he took early retirement at 62 because he said, my father, very practical, was, looked at the actuarial reports and said, hey, men die at 67. So I'm going to take my retirement early so I have a little more time to enjoy it. And, he died right on his schedule at 67. And, I wish he had shot a little farther for giving me a few more years.
given his death, did you at all think about not doing Field of Dreams? Did you think maybe the timing's not right?
Well, I guess I was more concerned with whether, I thought maybe I would just break down and not be able to get through the scene. I didn't know how this emotional thing was gonna affect me. What was strange though was at my father's funeral, I couldn't cry. I found myself, and that was a little scary. Here I'd worked so hard to be emotionally available and be this actor who could express these things, and found myself kind of just dry about it. And that kind of scared me too. Then I thought, wow, am I going to be able to bring the emotion to the last part of the scene, the scene. And what was interesting was my father had a very tough life. He like most of that generation suffered through the Depression, and he was in World War II, and his father had been sort of abusive to him, which I hadn't known until I finally got my father to open up about that, just a few years before he died. But when he was gone, I couldn't help but feel like my father had been freed from this very difficult life that he'd been given. He just, he'd worked hard. He'd gotten us all through college. And I think there was something in him that felt like, he'd done what he was here to do. And even when I was at the field there in Iowa, when we were shooting the movie, my image of him was as like a hummingbird, that he was like flying out to Jupiter, and then he'd fly back and he'd say, "Oh, Dwyer, my gosh, the Jupiter's amazing. You got to see it. I got to go." And off he'd go, and it was just felt so good for my father, who had been a fairly stoic guy, to be, in my imagination anyway, feeling this energy of the universe that, that had always kind of given him the short end of the stick. And so in that way, it felt great to feel like he had been freed from this difficult life. So I mean, I think part of there are many reasons, of course, why that movie is great, but I had very bittersweet feelings about my father's passing, which I think were imbued into that final scene that helped it, because it's very much a bittersweet scene too. When the father and son get together and you don't know if they recognize each other. And, and obviously everybody who comes up to me certainly says that, they would love that second chance with their dad, or have that catch. So anyway, in retrospect, it seemed like kismet, very much like it was maybe meant to be, as much as I miss my dad and wish I'd gotten to watch the movie with him, for instance.
How close were you and your father?
Well, I mean, as silly as it sounds, it was a little like Ray's relationship with John that he talks about in the opening monologue there. My dad, was from another generation, and I was kind of a little bit of a troublemaker. Both my brother and sister, older than I, were straight A students and, kind of goody two shoes. And I felt like the only way I could get attention was by being a bad boy. And so I did, they weren't terrible things, but in our family, doing anything that wasn't, drinking and staying out and, all that kind of stuff, was tantamount to breaking my father's heart in a way, I think. And, I look back on it now and am mortified that I put my dad through that. But, everybody has growing pains. I mean, it's Oedipus is a complex for a reason. I think young men need to find their way to supersede their fathers if, in creating their own life. And unfortunately, I didn't do that gracefully. And I'm sure I broke my dad's heart many times. And I'm glad that I was able finally, through therapy and through acting class, kind of learning all the wonderful things my father had given me, my work ethic and I'd love to build things. My dad was an architect, and I spent the rest of my life building things. When I couldn't get acting jobs, I was a handyman, and I built a cabinet for what's his name, Patrick, the guy who was Dr. Hunk on Grey's Anatomy. Patrick, I can't think of his name.
Oh, Dempsey.
Dempsey, yes, thank you. Yeah, I built, but he was working and I wasn't, but I built him a vanity for his bathroom, before. Anyway, but a lot of gifts my dad gave me, and of course, I found even more as the years had passed, but I was glad that I was able to kind of make my peace with him a couple of years before he died.
Yeah. He was proud of what you did as an actor?
You know what? Like I said, my dad was pretty stoic. My whole family, we never said we loved you. We never hugged each other. This was just the way it was in Ohio. It's the only thing I ever knew. I write a chapter in my book about, I was in theater classes and I would be with a complete stranger in a scene, and we were done. We'd be hugging each other and kissing and crying, and I thought, geez, I can't even do this with my parents and my brother and sister. So I tried to bring that, hugging back to my family, which I think I succeeded at, honestly. My mother and I ended up saying, I love you every time we saw each other, after that. And same with my dad. I never got a real hug out of him, but, it wasn't for lack of trying. So the only thing that really meant a lot to me was after he died and we were going through clearing his stuff out with my mom. We went to the VCR and he had all these VHS tapes, and they were every show that I'd ever been in. At that point, it had been, 8 years of little episodes of this and that. And all of the titles of it were written in my dad's hand, which just meant so much to me, because my mom was the person who always supported our theater stuff. And my dad was kind of like, I didn't know how he felt. And the fact that he was the one who was recording all my shows and writing, the titles and all that stuff on the VHS tapes was after the fact was a beautiful, touching moment for me to see that it was my dad who was kind of commandeering that part of my career. So
yeah, that's wonderful. It shows he was keeping track. He might not have let you know about it, but he was definitely keeping tabs on what you were doing. That's and cataloging it. That's very nice. We've talked before, Dwier, about your experience with Field of Dreams, and pretty much all the actors that you met, some of them, legendary performers like Burt Lancaster, of course, James Earl Jones. You really had positive interactions with everybody. Last time we talked, I think you told me you were still keeping in touch with Kevin Costner, another great actor. Do you and Kevin still communicate at all?
Yeah. Kevin lives just like 15 minutes up the coast from where I live here in Southern California. And yeah, we run into each other and at events, and yeah, you know, I he's always been very generous with me, and yeah, so I appreciate that. But yeah, we a lot of the rest of the cast, Frank Whaley, James Earl, unfortunately, they lived in New York, so I rarely saw them as much as I would have liked to. But yeah, Kevin is close by, and he actually grew up in Ventura County, uh, and so yeah, he's home, and yeah, this feels like home to me too.
Among actors, he is one of the biggest baseball fans out there. I mean, I know you're a baseball fan too, but Kevin Costner and baseball are like linked.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if not for Kevin Costner, who would have been making sports movies over the last 3 decades? When you think of all the great baseball movies, even Draft Day, and it is something that he's fascinated by. And this is a weird coincidence, but the first house I moved to when I moved out of LA was up here in Ventura County. I bought it from a guy who played baseball with Kevin at in Fillmore high school when he was there briefly, and he was also, so anyway, it was just a weird. This was before, or I guess it was after Field of Dreams actually, but yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I think it's great because I mean, I think any sports fan out there would agree in thanking Kevin for bringing us as many wonderful movies, but many sports movies that I dare say would not have been made without his, including Field of Dreams, which was not sure it was going to get made if Kevin hadn't signed on, I think.
Yeah, I mean, two of the baseball films are absolute classics, Field of Dreams being one, Bull Durham being another. For Love of the Game has drawn some criticism, but I enjoyed that as well. I mean, those are three, in my mind, standout baseball films, and obviously Costner is a key player in each one. Let's talk a little bit more about James Earl Jones, because I had a chance to meet him. He came to Cooperstown years ago to talk about Field of Dreams. He also talked a little bit about the wonderful role he played in the very funny movie The Sandlot. What was it like being on set with a guy like James Earl Jones?
Well, as you mentioned, there was really a stellar cast. I mean, I had worked with a lot of, I worked with Barbara Stanwyck in the first, movie that I was in LA, and I got to meet Jimmy Stewart, but James Earl was the guy I was kind of the most scared to meet because, he's Darth Vader. He's got that voice, and I was just beside myself. I was really rehearsing what I was going to say to him, like, and I remember thinking like, I'm a big fan of yours, Mr. Earl Jones. And I was like, what is his name hyphenated? Is it Earl Jones, or is it just, anyway, I was just, and I was rehearsing this, and because the way the movie was shot, I arrived in Iowa. They were already shooting. It was late in the schedule, as you'd imagine, for the last scene. And I was kind of in a shadow shooting group. We were shooting all the photos that they used, still photos that they used for the monologue at the beginning when Kevin's describing his father, showing me aging, and I had to do this old age makeup a day at a time. And so I spent 3 or 4 days on the set in Iowa, but not really meeting any of the cast because they were shooting the movie. I was shooting these pictures. And so I went to one of these days when I'd finished, I had gray in my hair and everything. I went to the makeup trailer, and James Earl is there. And, if anybody's been in a makeup trailer before, it's all mirrors, so, but I'm pretending I can't see him through the mirror, like sitting right next to me. I'm just pretending because I'm just trying to think, like, what am I going to say? How do I, and and he just reaches over and says, "Hi, I'm Jimmy."
Oh,
And he just broke the ice and just, made it easy for me. And he was just delightful. We talked about the role and everything else. And the only thing I can tell you is impressive as his voice is, every time you hear it, you recognize it immediately on screen. And I always thought that maybe they enhanced it somehow, because where does that voice come from? But I can tell you that in person, it is almost more impressive because, there's no, amplification, or he hasn't got a subwoofer in his pocket or something. He would say hi, and the makeup would be rattling on the table. It felt like, like the voice was coming through the ground. And anyway, but it was just one of the impressive things about him. The other being just what a kind and gentle human being and generous he was. You know, and I feel privileged to have known him and you know, wish I had been able to stay in touch with him. But, you know, show business is a little like that. You meet people and you become best friends because of the vulnerable nature of the work you're doing, and, you know, promise you'll stay in touch, and it rarely happens.
Oh, wow. That's an amazing story. I was always kind of curious about his voice myself, just because it is so powerful, but just to know it's as powerful in person, to me, that's incredible. And he's Darth Vader to me 100%. So,
Yeah. Well,
oh,
and you know,
awesome.
I'm sure you know, and your fans probably know that he was a stutterer when he was young. He didn't speak until he was like 8 years old, and you know, so for that to have been the legacy that he left is you know, all the more impressive.
Oh my gosh, no, absolutely. I'm kind of curious. Have you ever had a supernatural experience yourself, something unexplainable or something ghostly?
Huh. Well, you know, oddly, sort of believe in that stuff because I think of the universe's energy that we're all kind of dipping in and out of. And as I mentioned, you know, when my father died, and sort
Mhm.
of having that feeling on the field while I'm in the midst of trying to shoot this emotional scene, of feeling my father there with the other ghost players, and you know, even that it embodied this, you know, I call it a hummingbird just because of the nature of how quickly and he would come and go, and that kind
Right.
of thing. And I remember, you know, as I said, I hadn't been able to cry about my father, and that went on for a couple years after he died, which was even more perplexing to me. Uh, and uh, well, long story short, a Halloween like 2 years later, I happened to be in a mall, you know, in the old days when they were, you know, just a big shopping mall, and there were little kids walking around with their little baskets, getting food from all this, or getting candy from the stores.
Right.
It was something this mall had set up, and you know, I for some reason, seeing that, I just broke down in this mall, and I just wept, like I fell on a bench and was just crying my eyes out for maybe 20 minutes. You know, parents were shepherding their children away from me because they thought, what is this grown man doing just like by himself, crying his eyes out? But for some reason, it struck me. My dad was the one who would take us around to Halloween on you know, trick or treating out in the country. Like, as I said, you know, you had to drive everywhere. The houses were a quarter of a mile or about half a mile
Mhm.
apart. So anyway, for some reason, it hit me 2 years later, and I cried this, you know, endless tears. And then, you know, I was alone, so I just got up and had to pull myself together and walk out of this mini mall. But it was shortly after that when I was settled in this. I lived in a Japanese tea house in greater Los Angeles for a while with my girlfriend. And I remember one day I was walking up, there was like 28 kind of circuitous steps up to this little tea house that I lived in. And this breeze blew up, and it just stopped me in my tracks. And I kind of looked around, and I just knew as clearly, there was no voice, you know, in the sense of a literal voice, but it was my dad saying, I see that you're happy and you're okay. I need to move
Mhm.
on. And, you know, it just happened to me. And I, you know, when after I stood there and it was over, I walked up the rest of the way to you know, my tea house, but I knew that something had changed, you know, and I have no explanation for why that happened then. It wasn't like I was in a particular mood or anything else. It just happened.
Mhm.
And, you know, I've had other moments, you know, frequently on beaches or near water where I really feel at one with the universe. I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah.
There's just something that I feel like, yeah, I mean, Eugene O'Neill writes about it in Long Day's Journey into Night, about these moments where, you know, watching the seaweed in the ocean moving back and forth, and suddenly you are the seaweed, and for a second it feels like the curtain is drawn back and you can see, you know, what the world is about, and then it closes just as quickly and it's over, you know. And I've had moments like that, and anyway, you know, I'm grateful for
Mhm.
those moments, and I don't seek them out, but I try to pay attention when they happen.
No, absolutely. I think things like that always happen for a reason. Absolutely. I'm a believer, and I do thank you for sharing that because I'm always curious about what other people think about stuff like that. So thank you very much.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Bruce, you have did you? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask as a kind of follow up to that. It's interesting. We've had a few actors on this program, and we've asked them, if they believe in ghosts, and we believe in the supernatural. And it seems like most of them, they do have somewhat of a belief. It's not like they're seeing ghosts at every turn, but they do feel there is another realm out there. I don't know if that's common in Hollywood, common among actors, but it seems to be the common theme with the actors we've talked to. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a little bit of sense to me that, we've spent our lives using our imagination. Most of us were kids who were, you know, shunned or, outside, maybe played a lot by themselves. And, so I think, when you exercise that muscle of imagination and what if, and, I think you're less likely to reject that for, reasons
Yeah.
that don't really have a lot of substance to them. I think a lot of us are, very much, even if going into the acting business, you're betting on yourself. It's 1,000,000,000 to 1. Anybody will tell you that, how many your odds of actually becoming successful. So I think we are people who tend to want to believe, in the best. And, so it's kind of it makes sense a little bit, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. Dwyer, let's talk about your 1990 film, The Guardian. It's an unusual horror film in that it involves druid practices. Was directed by the famed William Friedkin, the guy who did The Exorcist. For those who haven't seen it, it's about a young couple who have a newborn son. They bring in a nanny to take care of this young baby, but they don't immediately realize the nanny is a druid who is actually sacrificing infants to a tree. And it sounds very much off the wall, but I saw the film just within the last week, and I'd heard a lot of negative reviews about it. I thought it was quite good, a lot better than just about every review I read. I thought it was good. It was stylishly done by Friedkin. It moves quickly. The acting, including yourself, is good. The special effects were good. I don't think it gets its credit. What do you feel about it?
Gosh, I mean, I think probably a lot of the, mixed reviews about it probably had mostly to do with Bill Friedkin. Here he is, an Academy Award-winning director, for French Connection, and had high expectations. He won that award early in his career, and I think went, then did The Exorcist, and did a lot of other movies, and I think kept trying to live up to that promise that he had. And at the same time, so I think people's expectations were higher maybe than they should have been. And I think the movie was probably as good as it was because he was an accomplished filmmaker. So he kind of was caught between his potential and his talent. And I mean, he was a very, very interesting man. I did 2 movies with him. I was in To Live and Die in LA as well. And he was a incredibly intelligent guy. I mean, here in Los Angeles at the Getty Museum, the biggest museum out here, he used to do some of the headset explanations of the artwork. I mean, this guy was very, very well read and artistically educated, and but he was a very childlike person. That's the only way I can describe it in the nicest way. He was like working with a 5-year-old, and in all the good and bad, the wild creativity, but kind of petulant temper. I mean, for instance, he fired, I'll bet, 6 sound crews on our shoot. The guys who were miking everything and all that, we were in, for the most part, we were in a sound stage, and he would hear things and say, "What's that buzz?" And the sound guys, whose job it is, would say, "There is no buzz, Billy. You're fired. Let's get another guy in here." And he fired all these crew members, and And at the end, when it was all done, he ended up looping most of the movie. I don't know if you know, looping at the end is when you usually re-record something that might have a airplane background noise that they didn't catch, and you have to basically lip sync yourself. They run the scene with you talking, and you have headsets, and it goes beep, 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 and you say, "Hey, come in," and try to match your performance. Well, Friedkin made me do almost the whole movie, which is an actor's nightmare. You know, you work yourself into an emotional state, and you try to put this performance together, and then to have somebody say, "Can you just make that up in a soundstage with something beeping in your head and no actors with you to interact off of?" Anyway, he was so crazy about this sound thing, and shared with me that, wouldn't it be great to shoot a movie all without sound and then loop the whole thing afterwards? And I was like, no, that wouldn't be a good thing, Bill. No. Anyway, he was a very, very odd person. Did some kind of, I thought, very misogynistic and God, I don't know what, almost cruel things to my co-stars, the women in there. You know, one scene, he didn't think Carrie Lowell, who was acting scared enough in this soundstage and with a set of our house in it, so he had someone fire a gun right next to her behind the flat, you know, in the middle of the scene, so that she would jump, you know, and then he would, you know, which to me, you know, I mean, I studied acting, took a lot of classes, and, you know, there's a lot of us who work very hard at, you know, doing what they're doing, and to have somebody kind of try to manipulate you that way, you know, rather than just tell you or direct you into giving the performance you want, you know, I found very, you know, kind of childish. And I think, in my mind, Friedkin was always trying to become that enfant terrible that he had shown everybody to be when he did French Connection, and was, you know, this gritty guerrilla filmmaker. And I think he was trying to become himself, you know, as many people do in this business, because once you do something, everybody wants you to do that same thing over and over and over again. And it becomes, you know, you either get bored with it, or you learn how to do it, you know, in a way that keeps you happy, or you implode trying to be that person. Because one thing you can't get back is innocence, you know, or naivete. You know, that's something that's, you know, I think it's meant the demise to a lot of, you know, great stars and great actors is, you know, how you can live up to expectations that people have of you.
Yeah. Was Carrie Lowell very upset by that?
Yeah, I mean, she was crying. I mean, it worked as far as him getting what he wants. And, you know, I consoled her, and at the time she was dating Griffin Dunn, I believe. And, you know, it just put this thing on the, you know, a pallor over the whole set. I thought that, you know, just was unnecessary, in my opinion. Jenny Seagrove, you know, played the nanny. She's an English actress, and you know, his behavior was, you know, as much of an obstacle as anything else that we were trying to, you know, in the midst of shooting this movie. And I thought the premise for the movie was, you know, beyond the pale a little bit. What the movie that I had signed up for was more like the movie that's called The Nanny, with that they had done, where it really is kind of nerve-wracking to hire a nanny to take care of your kids. I mean, you know, not all of us, I can't afford a nanny, but for those people, it's weird to give your kid to some stranger, you know, and that to me was what I found interesting about that movie. Was, you know, there's a lot of the movies about choosing this nanny, and then we end up with this cuckoo lady who's, you know, a druid and mysterious and has magical powers and all that stuff. But to me, I was more interested in the psychological dynamic of hiring someone, have them take care of your kids, and, you know, are they doing what they say you're doing? This is before nanny cams and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, anyway, I thought it kind of spun out a little too much. But, you know, for your horror fans, one of my biggest memories of that movie is when, in the end of the movie, I spoiler alert for you see it, but I end up cutting down this tree that's you know, that I have figured out is where she is sacrificing these children. And when I go to cut down this tree in the woods, blood comes out of it. It's like a human sort of, I guess, maybe because of all the sacrifices. Well, they had 55-gallon drums of fake blood, many of them, that they put inside here, and they had inside this tree all this, vinyl tubing that was filled with this pressurized blood. So when I cut into this thing with my chainsaw, I mean, it was just, I mean, literally a bloodbath, and it was a real chainsaw, and it was, probably a paper mache or fiberglass or foam tree. And I mean, I was just covered in blood. It was very disconcerting to me. I know it was a movie, but between takes, I had to just sit there in the blood because they couldn't recreate it. I was literally just drenched. So I would just sit there having this, corn syrup blood drying on me. And you just feel like, wow, I am a serial killer. And this is what it feels like. It's like, it's just very disconcerting to be, in that kind of state, and it was a movie I did right after Field of Dreams. So I go from playing Street Fighter to this, axe murdering, tree killer. But anyway.
You had to expound a lot of energy in this movie. I mean, I could tell that the chainsaw scene was grueling. There's also another scene earlier in the film where you have to run like 100-yard dash like you're in the Olympic trials. This was, I don't know how many takes Friedkin asked you to do that, but I can just imagine.
Well, that was a very interesting. I mean, I appreciate you even mentioning that, because it's such a short bit in the film, and this was shot in a real creek bed, the Santa Clarita River, right near Six Flags Magic Mountain up there in you're maybe if you're LA fans know, up there in Santa Clarita. And this was just a little stream in this very dense wood, as you can see from the thing. And I was just wearing these scrubs, and I was supposed to sprint towards the camera down this slippery rocked little real stream. And, and I, of course I went for it as hard as I could, and, it was shot in slow motion. But I mean, I remember I'd run this, I was in good shape. After I ran this thing, I mean, this river is one of those that's right through all the orange orchards. And I'm sure it's just rife with pesticides that just drain into this thing, because I kind of collapsed at the end of after I did that little 100-yard dash you were talking about. And I mean, it was nothing serious. I didn't go to hospital or anything, but I was like, I didn't know what happened, because like I said, I was in good shape. I was playing basketball and everything. So, but I think there was definitely something in that water. And, it was, I mean, there's some beautiful moments in that movie. And there's also, the typical actor's complaint that I think some of my best scenes are on the cutting room floor. There were several where I got to improvise, and tear apart the nanny's room when I'm trying to figure out what's going on with her and all that I was very proud of, that, didn't even make it into the movie. So c'est la vie.
Yeah. You mentioned before you did 2 movies with Friedkin. The earlier one was To Live and Die in L.A., a really good movie, action type movie. Is it true that Friedkin had forgotten that he had worked with you on that film? And then he kind of sheepishly apologized for it on the set of The Guardian?
I'm still fairly convinced that's how I got the part in The Guardian. It's very unlike me to confront somebody with that. But when we did To Live and Die in L.A., that they cast that in Chicago, I was still just starting out, and Friedkin came in, and it was just a couple line role of this doctor, and Friedkin says, improvise with me. And so he pretended to be the doctor, whoever I was supposed to be talking with, or maybe Billy Peterson, I guess he was maybe supposed to be. And so he, asked me a question, thought, and I kind of got in his face, and, like, he was like, oh, anyway, he cast me in this small part. No big deal. This is, gosh, how many years later? 81 to 89. So about 8 years later, they had been casting the whole rest of this, of The Guardian had been cast, Jenny Seagrove and Carrie Lowell and Brad Hall, all those guys were already cast, and they couldn't find the dad. He saw Field of Dreams, and he said, I think that's my guy. Anyway, I come in and into the room, and it's him and the producer, I think Joe Wazan, and he shakes my hand. Well, nice to meet you. And I said, well, actually, Billy, I was already in one of your movies. And oh my gosh, he was so flummoxed that oh my, because he was trying to make a big deal to I don't know, pitch me to the producers, and And I think it just, you know, it's typical that something that made him uncomfortable is something he'd say, "Oh yeah, I want more of that," you know, or whatever. Anyway, I'm so glad that I did that. I mean, I can't say I'm necessarily glad I did the movie. I wish the movie had come out better, but anyway, I got that part, and it was you know, it was a great coup, and you know, it was fun to have Billy on his heels for once in his life.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I like the movie. I think it's like a 3-star film, which is a good rating in my book, and I really enjoyed it. I had just one final question on The Guardian. You mentioned the actress a couple times, Jenny Seagrove. She makes a very good villain in this film. She is on the surface a charming British nanny with wonderful credentials, which turn out to be basically fake. Then she sort of turns into a tree, and you know.
And
Very strange. She's running around naked in the house and out in the woods, and that's when people start to become suspicious of what she's doing. But I thought she played the part very well. I thought she did a really good job. She's an actress I'm not that much familiar with, but I thought she was really good in this.
yeah, I agree. She brought that English reserve to that, which I think grounded the movie, you know, because it was so wild that, you know, had she, you know, been more, you know, animated or hysterical, even, that I think it would have detracted from the overall thing. You know, and you know, she was a lovely person, and I think was as frustrated with Friedkin's antics as I was. You know, being British and you know, stiff upper lip, that sort of thing. I think, you know, I mean, I had to do a nude lovemaking scene with both Carrie Lowell, who's this beautiful Bond girl actress, and you know, and Jenny, who's also beautiful, and you know, love scenes are not nearly as romantic or fun to do as they appear to audiences. But yeah, she was we ended up, I think the three of us ended up bonding because Billy was, I mean, you know, they call him Hurricane Billy for a reason, and but it ended up kind of, I think, bonding us in a way that you know, we made it clear that, hey, let's stick up for each other. If Billy does some other weird shit, you know, let's back each other up, and you know, that can only, I think, help in a situation like that.
Oh, wow. Oh, awesome. I have not seen that movie, so I am going to have to see that movie because it sounds fascinating.
Well, I should add one thing, that when they just, I think they just re-released The Guardian onto video with some special features. And so
Really?
the people who are putting this together called me up and said, "Hey man, you willing to talk to me and all this stuff about Billy Friedkin?" I was like, okay. So anyway, I told the story as I just told you about him shooting behind the thing. And, you know, and I, you know, I was already retired from acting, and, you know, usually you say nice things about people you work with as a rule. That's just a thing, you know. But I thought, you know, what the heck, you know, they're trying to get people to watch this movie. So I told this story about him shooting the gun behind there and how tacky I thought it was. Anyway, I get a call on my cell phone, a voicemail, like a week later, or once the thing came out or whatever. And he said, "Hi, Dwyer, this is Bill Friedkin. Maybe we should have lunch sometime. I'd love to talk to you." You know, that's all he said. And I thought, oh my God. I mean, I hadn't seen him since we shot the movie, you know, 30 years ago. So I just knew he was just like, it was just his way of saying, "Hey, I'm watching you, and how dare you say anything," you know. But, you know, if I'd talked to him, I would have said, "Hey, I'm sorry, Billy. I mean, it did happen. And I was just trying to sell your movie. You make more money when I sell your movie." So anyway,
Well, that's right.
I found it amusing.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to touch on another one of your films. So you did two of the House films, and I was curious, the first movie, the one with William Catt. So I always remember watching him as a kid, you know, the greatest American hero. So I saw this movie actually when I was quite young, and I really enjoyed it. Do you have like a story that you could share about working on that set?
That was so long ago. And William Catt also, you know, I was a fan. I mean, obviously he was the star of that movie. Richard Mole was in it, which is also interesting. This was
Right.
before Night Court, and he was a very funny guy. I mean, I was playing this lieutenant who's kind of a, it's a very, it's a trope of Vietnam that, many of the soldiers would kill the lieutenants because a lot of these guys were West Pointer, kind of intellectual types who had no idea of how to actually survive in the style of war that, Vietnam was. And so, yeah. And so I was just supposed to be this kind of tight-assed, lieutenant. And, we had a great time shooting it. Richard Moll is as goofy as you imagine he would be. And, he's head and shoulders above everybody else. And, I just remember, we had this jungle scene that was all on, on a sound stage. So it was, all fake and, hiding and gunfire and, all that kind of stuff. And he would always be, making some little snide comment that would, keep having us try to keep a straight face, for the camera when it was coming around. But, it was a fairly short gig for me. I, of course, was very happy to have done it, but I can't really recall anything other than that was, particularly memorable. But I was proud of the fact that then when they made House 2, which was the same producers, but, and, part of this series, but unrelated, I was also in House 2. So in a different part, so I was very proud that I was maybe a trivia question that what actor was in both House 1 and House 2. Also the tagline for House 2, the second story. That's a good tagline.
It is. They were actually pretty good movies. I remember that one, that very first one especially, and I did enjoy that one. Go ahead, Bruce.
George Wendt was in the first one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I just remembered that. I mean, I know George kind of through Second City and Chicago and stuff over the years, and I had completely forgotten when I was getting ready to watch this. I thought, I should watch the trailer of that movie and try to remind myself what even the movie's about. And there was George Wendt. I thought, oh my God, I worked with George Wendt. I didn't even know. And then Ratzenberger is in House 2. So I worked with half of the cast of Cheers before they were, anyway.
Yeah, that is funny. Dwier, you told me a while back when we talked for a Hall of Fame production that we did that you've basically retired from acting, but you're still young. You still look good. Would you consider a return if the right part, the right film came about, the right offer was made to you?
Boy, I mean, the quick answer is probably no, but if it were the right role and the, whatever, I just kind of got tired. I'd been in the business for 40 years and I was still auditioning for, one-line parts, and I just thought, I'd always told myself that I wanted to get out of this business before I got bitter, because I'd seen, you go to auditions and you see older actors who, all they can talk about is if they're going to make enough money to get their insurance for the year. And, to me, it just felt sad. It's not why I got into this. I genuinely, as naive and ridiculous as it sounds now, I really wanted to change the world. I wanted to learn acting. As I mentioned, I grew up on this farm with these stoic parents, and I had all these emotions. This is why I got into trouble as a kid. I was angry, but I didn't have any place to put that. My parents were perfectly nice people. I went to church. I mean, but there was something about it that did not make sense to me. I couldn't reconcile the world I was looking at with the world I was supposedly told was happening out there. And, as again, through therapy, but mainly through acting classes where you're taught your emotions are your talent. That's what, so you have to learn how to get them out of yourself, and I went through, when finally that anger came up in acting classes by the teacher berating me over and over again, and that stuff came out, it was like a volcano. And I thought, oh gosh, no wonder I'd never let this out before. I'm a sicko. I should be in jail or something, But you realize that it's just all this stuff that's built up, and it's going to go off like a volcano, but then it's going to get calm again because you've let out this, all the stuff that you've stuffed down for so long. And so it was just kind of it was just a great thing for my life as a person. But I got to the end of it and I'm auditioning for parts that, like I'm an accountant or something. Like it wasn't, I don't know. I always thought of myself as a character actor, even though I looked like a character actor and rarely got thought of as a character actor. that's the kind of stuff. I was a funny kid. I thought I was going to be, I was the class clown in my high school. I thought I was going to do comedies my whole life. I used to do impersonations. And when I got out to Hollywood, I suddenly got put in this, angry young man category. Rarely did any comedies. I did one called Mom and Dad Save the World, which, I got to play a king of the idiots. And it was, one of my favorite experiences because, that's, like I said, that's what I thought I was going to do for my whole career. And, I just got to a point where I didn't even want the parts I was auditioning for. And I thought, this is a waste of my time. Yeah. And, I don't know. Yeah. Sometimes I think about it, you see something that's really good on television or on the movies, which is, I think rarer and rarer, but, I think, wow, I would have loved to have had that opportunity, but I know that I wouldn't have gotten it in the way the hierarchy of Hollywood works if you haven't done all this stuff and, have the right agent and all that stuff. It's very difficult. And, I did it for 40 years, but I don't know how now, when I look back, the rejection, I don't have a lot of confidence. I don't know how I put up with the rejection. I managed to survive all those years, but I like to think I look back on it now. And I mean, it was a great thing. Like when I was young and a teenager, I thought, you know what, I should try acting. Because if I don't want to be 50 or 60 years old and looking back and saying I never gave it a try, And honestly, now that I'm 66 years old, that's just what I think. Like, oh my God, I did it. Like for a little farm kid, I did okay. Like I was in the top 1% of actors in the history of the world as far as, kind of working and having a career and all that. And so I'm glad that I somehow had that thought when I was too young to have had that kind of thought, but it ended up being true. And I'm grateful.
Yeah.
I suppose the right part in the right situation, maybe, but I enjoy my life so much now. And I don't know. Yeah, it would have to be the right thing, but thank you for even suggesting it. I appreciate it.
Sure. Well, selfishly, I'd love to see you back on screen. I've enjoyed a lot of your work. Another film we didn't talk about, The Cutting Edge. I really like that one, too. There are others as well, but those are some that come to mind. But I can certainly understand where you're coming from, and you've put together a nice career and a nice resume. One last question for Dwier. For fans who would like to buy your book, which is terrific, it's called If You Build It, a book about fathers, fans, and Field of Dreams. What's the best way? Do you have a website? Should they go to Amazon.com? What should they do?
Either of those. You can get it on Amazon. I sell signed copies on my site, which is just my name, Dwier Brown, DWIER Brown.com. I appreciate the plug. And I'm proud of that book. And I only wrote it because I was hoping Kevin would write a book about it, or James Earl or somebody. It was such this great movie. And I was just such a small part in it. I wanted to know more of this stuff. So, but it, came around to the 25th anniversary and I figured probably nobody's going to do this. And, so I, of course I'm in the movie, but I also, researched it, looked through all the casting records, and it was quite an adventure to, find out more about this movie that I, thought I knew everything about. And, anyway, it was a great, I feel it helped me own that small part. I'd spent most of my career apologizing for that small part in this movie. People would say, "Oh, you did a great job." I was like, "Thanks." But I think anybody could have, once the movie, James Earl and Kevin get you in that state of mind, anybody could have walked in there. But when I wrote the book, I realized, when I kind of linked it, I'd never really kind of linked it to my father's death and to these other things. And even that, like with Kevin, if you go up to Kevin Costner, you could talk to him about a dozen of his films that were amazing. When people see me, it's usually Field of Dreams. And I've allowed myself to be present for that, to be John Kinsella for these people, because it's been such an emotional connection to my own father and to my acting career, because this is what I wanted. I wanted to change the world. And I ended up being in this wonderful movie that kind of did that for a lot of people. I mean, and it's important when somebody tries to compliment you that you take that compliment. If you kind of like, it was nothing, you're breaking that little bond between audience and I learned this on stage, like you have a bad night on stage and you go out there and people are applauding for you. If you hide yourself and, because you're kind of ashamed that you missed your line or you whatever, you're hurting their feelings, it's rude. And so I always try to, if they liked me, who am I to judge? I know I could do better, but, to kind of give them the cold shoulder because you don't feel good about it. So I feel good about kind of being that John Kinsella character for people, because I know that sometimes they tell me things I swear they've never told anybody in their lives. Secrets that they had with their dad or something. And, I mean, that's beautiful. And I guess it's what I got in this business for. So it's the least I can do, in my opinion.
Well, when film critics give their top 5 baseball films, Field of Dreams is inevitably in that list. Usually A League of Their Own, Bull Durham, a couple of others, but Field of Dreams comes up quite commonly. Again, if you want to get the book, If You Build It, a book about fathers, fans, and Field of Dreams, just go to Dwier's website, dwierbrown.com, or you can purchase it at Amazon. Dwier, as always, we thank you. Really appreciate you. It's great catching up.
Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate it. Thank you, Tracy.
Our thanks to Dwier Brown and to Tracy for their time over this past hour. We hope you all have enjoyed the program. We thank all of you for joining us in this Museum of the Macabre, and we do hope we'll see you again next time right here in the Ghostly Gallery.